are going to be talking about the most easiest lesson in chemistry, the arrangement of particles. This is also known as the states of matter. So all particles tend to take one of the three states of matter. Either they can be solid, or they can be liquid, or they can be a gas. So all these three have specific arrangements. So if you take a look at the solid, you can see that the particles, if you draw it in a box, all the particles are going to be tightly packed. So that is exactly why a table is not fragile, it's tightly packed. But if you take a look at the liquid, erase this a little bit, and a liquid, even though the particles are tightly packed, they are less tightly packed compared to that of the solid. The third one are the gases. They are much more free. This is exactly why even when you're swimming in water, you can push the particles away because liquid particles can move. But when you're walking through air, you don't have to do that. You can just walk through air. That means the particles are further apart from each other. So this gives a few differences between solids, liquids and gases. So if you take the solid, like I mentioned before, they are arranged in a regular pattern. Usually if you get to draw it in a box, you can draw it this way. They're usually tightly packed, and because they are tightly packed, they are more likely to have a shape. They do have a fixed shape. They vibrate about fixed position. This word is very important. They vibrate about fixed positions. And because of that, again, they have a fixed shape and volume. But if you take a liquid, liquids usually have irregular arrangements. You don't see a liquid taking a perfect shape, but a liquid tends to have a fixed volume and they can move around. The good thing about a liquid is they can take the shape of the container. If you pour it to a bottle, it will take the shape of the bottle. If you look at the ocean, it has formed a different structure. If you go to a gas particles, they are usually much more freely arranged. They are free moving particles, they are far apart, and they don't have a fixed shape or volume. Right, so here you can just see I have given a three common examples. You have a solid, that is the ice cube, and then here this is water vapor, and the liquid is the water that you drink. So there are so many other examples. So what actually happens? Now here the next part that we're going to talk about are the interconversions of these particles. So let's start very simple. If you take a solid, again we go back to the example of the ice cube. This ice cube can be melted. You usually, when you take the ice cube out of the refrigerator, keep it outside even in room temperature. It usually turns into liquid water within a few minutes. If it's extremely hot, then it takes only a few seconds. So what is that process? This process of a solid going into a liquid. This is called melting. So I use a different color to say that. That is called melting. The theory behind it, what happens? When the heat increases, the particles gain something called kinetic energy. This is also represented as Ke. Therefore, they start vibrating. So when they vibrate, if you take a look at the picture, they are very tightly packed. So when they start vibrating, they tend to break the bonds that are connecting them, and they go into a much more free structure. So they go from a solid, a tight packed solid, to a much more free structure due to the increase in kinetic energy. Why does kinetic energy increase? Because they have to melt. Why does something melt? Due to the increase in temperature. Now the opposite can happen. Now this can go further. You start off with a liquid. Remember the two words, kinetic energy and the conversion. The liquid can go into a gas, can go further into a gas. Just draw it that way. Don't have to draw a very straight arrow. What happens there? How does a liquid, how do you turn water into water vapor? By boiling. So again the same procedure that happens there. When you boil water, water particles, they gain kinetic energy, they tend to vibrate and they boil. So usually if you take the ice cube, it has a melting point. Melting point in the sense the temperature at which it starts melting. So what is the melting point of ice cube? It's 0 degree Celsius. That is just for the ice cube example. Then for the other one, a liquid boils at 100 degrees Celsius and gets converted to a gas. That is another example. Can these processes happen the other way around? Yes, it can happen the other way around. A gas can go back to a liquid and we call that process condensation. This can go back to a liquid. So what happens there? We spoke about increasing the kinetic energy. This time we are going to decrease the kinetic energy. No, there's no such thing like that, but usually what happens is when a gas goes back to a liquid, the kinetic energy in the system decreases. So they tend to vibrate around each other. Therefore, they can get packed into a solid. So their vibrations would attract them and pack them into a solid because they are not quickly rotating. They are rotating only very slowly. So these two particles, when this gas starts rotating very slowly around this fellow, they tend to attract each other and they form a very compact structure. So they form the compact structure of that. A liquid can definitely go back to a solid. That is how you make ice cubes, obviously. What do? You freeze it. So this undergoes freezing, that forms a solid. Certain substances, now freezing will make sure solidification happens. There's something else. Usually solidification is a term where you use when a gas turns directly to a solid. Again, a possible mechanism. Sublimation is a special mechanism. So sublimation is usually carried out when a solid directly goes to a gas. This process is known as sublimation, and this does not happen in most of the particles. A very common thing that undergoes sublimation is carbon dioxide. Solid carbon dioxide is referred to as dry ice, and then it goes to the gaseous form, which is carbon dioxide. So this is the basic structure, but the most important things that you have to remember are the movement of particles from one place to another, the attractive forces, the kinetic energy. The most important part here is the kinetic energy. So I hope this lesson was helpful, and see you again in another video.